Good evening, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. I hope you're doing very well tonight. Maybe you'll be doing better after you hear about this card. Maybe you're going to be doing a lot worse. I think it depends on what type of deck you play and what type of gameplay, frankly, you're looking for out of Modern. No matter what you think about it or whether or not this goes into your decks or maybe blows out the decks you love to play the most, I think we can all agree that this cycle of mythic rare elemental incarnations with 0 mana cost evoke abilities, these are some of the most pushed cards in Modern Horizons 2. So Solitude, my friends, is no exception. It's the white one, and we know that white has gotten good cards lately, for sure, some pushed ones. Prior to that, though, it was always like, okay, we expect kind of the white card of a cycle to be safer, to be worse, to just be less realistically impactful for Modern. Now, I was not sure which way they would go. I thought they might break that kind of 2 years old trend, and they have, because this card is very, very good. I still expected it to be a little bit more in the value generation vein. This is not it. This is an answer card, my friends. This is Force of Plowshares. This is Solitude. We are going to break it down, what it does, what it's good against, and where it might find a home in Modern. Thank you so much for watching Solitude. Let's talk about it. So Solitude has the normal pack art, which is pretty cool, and then the Svetlin Velinov, more abstract, full art, very different color palette here, very different take altogether version. This one kind of following the same pattern as Grief. In any case, what does Solitude do? Well, it is a 5-drop, 3 generic, 2 white for an elemental incarnation. It is a 3/2 with flash and lifelink. It also has a very powerful ETB. When Solitude enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 other target creature. That creature's controller gains life equal to its power, and that's right, this is the Swords to Plowshares effect on an ETB. This is so much more powerful on average in the aggregate than Path to Exile. I cannot even explain to you. Path to Exile is perfectly balanced for Modern. Swords to Plowshares absolutely, in my opinion, should not be in Modern. Absolutely too powerful with removal, especially for decks that are not trying to clock the opponent. So let that sink in. Solitude is Swords to Plowshares as far as an ETB goes. And note that it says up to 1 other target creature. This becomes relevant to our interests in a little bit. But you don't even have to target a creature if there is not a creature to target. And flash, lifelink, 3/2, this is on a body, so when you hardcast it, it is doing the Swords to Plowshares thing, and it's doing the flash, lifelink, 3/2 thing. That is a pretty incredible combination in terms of swinging a creature-based matchup in your favor, but it wouldn't be very playable if all you could do is hardcast it, but just like the other cards in the cycle, you can evoke it, and when you evoke it is when things get really, really interesting. So that evoke cost, again, is 0 mana, but what it does require to do is exile a white card from your hand. And then you can evoke it, and in a pinch you can 2-for-1 yourself to Swords to Plowshares an opponent's creature, and make no mistake, against decks that shove all in or against decks that are just a little bit too fast, too hot to handle, that's a very, very valid use case. So just like with Grief, you have the use case of 2-for-1ing yourself in order to achieve efficient interaction at the time you need it the most, or you have the use case of late game, this being a very powerful X-for-1 effect that gives you a powerful piece of interaction and leaves a very relevant body behind. But that is only the beginning, my friends. I refer you to my Grief Guy Ale or Orzhov Grief Blade list that I have featured on the channel. I talked about this in my reacting to 12 Modern Horizons spoilers video, and I also made a deck tech about Orzhov Grief Blade in the wake of the reveal of Grief. And the whole idea here behind this list, which I haven't altered since then, is that with Ephemerate, you really make Evoke insane, because you evoke something for free, so on turn 1, as long as you have a land that can make white, you evoke your Grief, or, in fact, you evoke your Solitude, and then with the triggers on the stack, you ephemerate this card. That means you are going to actually have it enter the battlefield again. The trigger resolves a second time, and you also get the body left behind on top of that if you want to and if you need to. Ephemerate has rebound, of course, so you can trigger these cards a third time. And I already thought that one of the most promising shells for Grief was Deadguy, right? Because we have a lot of good blink targets with Ephemerate. You already have to play white in the first place for Ephemerate. Why not just stay true to these two colors, have a really clean mana base, some good consistency, painlessness, and a very focused game plan? Well, imagine how much I looked forward to the reveal of the White Elemental, right? Because if there's another card that we're waiting to see that could possibly go into that list, it would be the White Elemental. Now, if this was like a really proactive value generation move, that could also be extremely synergistic with Ephemerate. Almost no matter what it does, it would be a slam dunk. Now, here we have to say, okay, exactly how much does a deck like that need an effect like this? And the truth is, we could use it a lot, because at the end of the day, we are an interactive deck. We want the most powerful, impactful forms of interaction that we can possibly muster. And I think only a fool would dismiss the power of a Swords to Plowshare style effect that is extremely abusable with Ephemerate. To be clear, with Ephemerate, you can plow 3 opposing creatures. Now, unlike with Grief, that's not particularly viable turn 1, unless your opponent is bringing Affinity back from the dead and you're on the play, or on the draw rather, right? But it is a very fantastic mid-game play to clean up whatever the opponent's up to, as long as they are playing creatures. In terms of mechanics, my friends, it is worth noting that Swords to Plowshares is an instant, as are Path to Exile, Fatal Push, other actually modern legal premier pieces of interaction. Solitude is not. Solitude is a creature with a triggered ability. This is relevant in a few different ways. So number one, let's just acknowledge that this ETB, this Plowshare style effect, this can take care of almost anything in Modern. Swords to Plowshares is one of the most ubiquitous answers in any format that it is legal in, but we also have some additional use cases in Modern. You can hit a Hex Drinker anywhere from level 3 through level 7. Hex Drinker has to become level 8 in order to be safe from the ETB of Solitude, and that is fantastic. Now, you think of other premier threats in the format. You can cleanly answer Death Shadow. You can cleanly answer Scourge of the Skyclaves. It just so happens that all of those cards are played together in the same deck, and it's a deck I love. It gives me no pleasure to say this, my friends, but imagine your opponent having a wide board, a relatively low life total, they've got their Scourge down, they've got their Shadow down, and you get to Solitude away their Hex Drinker. That is completely awesome. Maybe you can ephemerate this and take care of their whole board. Maybe you don't even have to, because maybe the life gain that you're granting the opponent is enough to kill their shadows and or kill or cripple their Scourges of the Skyclaves. So this life gain that you're granting the opponent not only is in a vacuum, again, a much less worrisome downside than that granted by Path to Exile on average, it also has much higher blowout potential. You're not really going to blow your opponent out by giving them a land ever, but you are going to blow your opponent out, specifically if they're on a Death Shadow variant, by giving them some life. It is also worth noting that Solitude can answer Emrakul, and Emrakul is still a focal piece of many combo decks, including some Through the Breach style shenanigans, and who knows what's going to come out of MH2. And of course, Solitude is not a spell. Solitude is a spell. It's not an instant. Emrakul has protection from colored spells. So it's a spell, but what happens is the spell is not what targets Emrakul. The triggered ability does, therefore Emrakul can be targeted. I didn't say that articulately at all. Sorry about that, not going to go back and redo it. You get the idea. Solitude's triggered ability can even answer the virtually unanswerable Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. Now, I'm not going to update this list here and now for you, my friends, because I think we just need to see a few more cards before I want to really make heavy tweaks to this, do heavy surgery to this Grief Guy Ale list, but I do think that Deadguy Ale is still a great home for Grief, also a great home for Solitude. Why? Well, the clock of Grief Guy Ale of black-white threats is relatively anemic. That might seem like it's a little counterintuitive, right? Because we're giving them life that makes our clock even worse. But I disagree, because if you look at like a shell like Abzan that could play these cards, part of the strength of Abzan is being able to deploy turn 2 Tarmogoyf in a race. We're kind of like almost making that plan worse by playing Solitude. I would rather do something more snowbally, have this extreme ephemerate value with the blinking, with the extreme depletion, and then right now on my current list, I'm only on 3 Stoneforge Mystic and 3 artifacts. I want to up both of those counts to 4 while also finding room for Solitude, so it's going to take some doing. But the idea here is you completely deplete the opponent out with Grief, you completely answer and blow out all of their threats with Solitude, and then you find Stoneforge Mystic getting a ton of X for ones if you ephemerate her, but also you find her often, you find the most impactful sword or other piece of equipment in the matchup, and you win with anything. You win with your Apparition, with your Sculler, with your Shriekmaw. You win with the Ham Sandwich as long as it's got a sword, because your elemental cycle is so powerful at stopping the opponent from having much of anything to say about what you're doing. And I think that's still a very promising, perhaps the most promising mid-range shell for these types of cards, but we don't even necessarily have to be so fair, because we have seen a lot of really nice black-white reanimator cards come out so far in this set. We're talking about Priest of Fell Rites, who is a bear that can untap and unearth something, and reanimate something, and she herself can be unearthed, giving the card some inherent grindy 2-for-1 value. We also have this card that has been translated as Persist. That might not actually be what it's called, but this is another reanimation card, non-legendary card. Choose target non-legendary card in your graveyard, return it to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. We also have seen Unmarked Grave as a way to find what you need and put it in the graveyard. So what if we decide, okay, we are going to answer everything the opponent does with the extreme value and tempo positivity of Grief plus Ephemerate and Solitude plus Ephemerate, and we are also going to play other interactive cards that stop the opponent from doing what they're doing. And we are going to combo finish by unmarked graving, or otherwise getting into the graveyard, something like Ashen Rider, which will then double down on our depletion and end the game. Something very powerful like that is very difficult for the opponent to answer. I don't know if this shell necessarily has all of the components to be optimal, but I think there is a burgeoning and promising idea behind it. In any case, it almost doesn't matter what the shell is right now. The point is that Solitude is completely insane as an answer card. It is, again, not quite as proactive as something that would be pure value generation, but at this point, having seen the blue elemental as well, I don't think they're going to make any of them, and that's probably good design, frankly. And it's also not as proactive early game as Grief, right? But the power of this is not to be underestimated. Again, there are 3 different use cases. One is tempo positive, value negative, but kind of the break glass in case of emergency mode. The other one is the late game mode, which is value positive and very interesting in a few different ways. And then there's the Wombo combo with Ephemerate, totally wrecking your opponent's board, especially blowing them out if they're a shadow deck. But don't even focus on that. Just think about literal any creature deck, and the prospect of ephemerating for triple Swords to Plowshare is going to be very difficult for any deck to recover from. Obviously, Solitude has potential in other blink shells that are not the one that I showed you here that can play Ephemerate and do lots of other intriguing things as well, taxes, what have you. Also, obviously, a reasonable control card as well, especially if said control deck is heavy on the white. So there you go, my friends. That is my hot take on a very, very strong card. Do not expect anything less than major waves in Modern, made by Solitude. Let me know what your thoughts are on the card, on the cycle as a whole, on what shell you see as most promising, please, in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching. I will talk to you soon, and eager to see the remainder of this cycle. But I think we've got a stew cooking here with Griefblade and other related shells.